Early Christian Heresies, our second section, second lesson. Early Christian Heresies, two basic questions to ask. First, we want to look at Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism is a philosophy that comes from Aristotle and Plato before the time of Christ. They had an understanding of a supreme being, but they also had an understanding of lesser beings, sort of demigods. And so we'll see how that connects to Christology, to Christ, and how it leads some to heresy, to incorrect teachings about the truth of Christ and what he taught. And then we'll look at the heresies of Gnosticism and Arianism. Both of those deal with that idea. And then later Apollinarianism, Nestorianism, and Monophysitism. And those three deal with sort of who Christ is, his personhood and his natures. All right, the key ideas. Philosophy of Plato and Aristotle comes from the Greek, and this Greek language has great terms that are used to help us articulate, clarify, understand the truth of Christ. So that Greek language is good. Right? Sort of like we talk about language, things being lost in translation, or you take a word and you define it, but you're missing something from the definition. So theology, faith-seeking understanding, uses other words and other philosophies to try to understand that truth that comes out of Scripture. And most importantly for this topic is the understanding of the word logos. Logos in Greek, this word, and coming out of Neoplatonism, leads to some to misunderstand who Jesus Christ is. Gnosticism itself claimed to have secret knowledge of Christ. Arianism claimed to deny that Christ was truly divine. Apollinarianism denies that Christ had a human mind and will. Nestorianism claimed that Jesus Christ was a union of two persons, sort of like two people glued together rather than one person. And Monophysitism sort of had this idea that Christ's human nature was destroyed by the divine nature of Christ. So he wasn't truly and fully human with the human nature. These early heresies, really to begin, we look at John, the first chapter of the Gospel of John, where John writes in great theological language. Right? He's not writing in common terminology, but he says in great theological, philosophical terminology, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And continuing on, he says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Right, a great theological, philosophical understanding of Jesus Christ, the Logos, the Word, right, divine, with God, is God, right, with the Father, in the beginning, before things are created. But even though this word, Logos, from Greek, is important and written in by John, we have a couple issues that arise. Remember, every time we talk about this doctrine, teaching, truth, what are we talking about? We're talking about Christ himself has revealed truth, revealed who God is and the truth of God and the truth about the world, salvation, grace, right? Christ handed on that truth to the church. And what we're talking about, origin of all Catholic doctrines, is us trying to clarify, make clear that truth of Christ, right? When people have questions about that truth of Christ, we want to use every method possible to clearly state the truth that Christ handed on, right? That truth is contained, and Christ gave it in the deposit of faith, and that's entrusted to the church and the apostles by Christ, and it's found in sacred scripture and sacred tradition. The subject matter of the early heresies all has to do with Jesus Christ, the person, the nature of Jesus Christ. Who is he? What is he? Right? He's talked about, he's revealed himself, he's revealed something about God, but what does that mean about him? Who is Jesus? Now, early Christianity, we have to say, it was a great deal, inestimable value to Greek language, philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle and Plato talk about, even before Christ, use great language to talk about a supreme being, ultimate being, what's necessary, da-da-da-da-da. It's great for us to be able to understand, develop an understanding of Christ and what he's taught. Neoplatonists themselves see God as the supreme being, right? It seems more lofty. A supreme being seems more sort of distant. It's all philosophy, right? It's not personal, right? So non-Christians, right, before the time of Christ, this philosophy, and they come to, just through reason, an understanding of a supreme being. Remember Aristotle and the proofs for God's existence? Well, Platonism, Neoplatonists have this understanding, through reason, get to the supreme being, that there's one God, one supreme being, who created the world. And then Neoplatonists have this idea of lesser beings, sort of demigods or something like that, that the world comes about through. One of these would be the Logos, lowercase l, Logos. St. John uses that same word, but he uses it in a different way. He refers to God the Son, capital L, capital G, capital S, right? The Logos. In the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word was with God, right? This divinity, divine aspect of the Son. The Word became flesh, right? So he is, and he becomes man, right? Neoplatonists have a misunderstanding then, right? You see the difference. A supreme being who creates the world through lesser beings, right? Creatures, one being the Logos, and John and the Christian view that the Logos is God himself, right? Trinity, Father, Son, Spirit. And so their way of looking at the Logos was a created being, something inferior to God, the supreme being, right? So for their point of view, they would kind of tend to, if they encountered Christ or the Christian message, is to see Jesus not as God, fully divine, but that Jesus can't be fully divine. And the problem they have with creation in general is they say that God is the supreme being. He is supreme in that he is spiritual. Anything that is created is lesser. It's imperfect, right? Maybe even tends towards evil. So they see a problem, right? An obstacle to this idea that if perfection has to do with the spiritual world, well, they don't like the idea of Christ becoming a man, right? Of the spiritual, supreme, good being becoming something that's filthy, that's lesser, that's worldly, right? That's created. It doesn't make sense to them. Gnosticism itself takes all this stuff and comes up with some kind of idea of gnosis, knowledge. In their case, there's this secret knowledge, right? And Gnostics have a secret understanding and knowledge of what it means to be a perfect man, right? To be saved, to be man fully alive, in a sense. Right? For them, they have an understanding that there's two gods. There is the creator God, the one who creates all this physical stuff. He brings about evil. Their idea, they connected it once they take on the scriptures and they assimilate it to their ideas. It's Old Testament, a God that's mean and evil. Right? And then they come up with another God. They have another God who is the spiritual God, unknowable, divine being. Right? And this God is the God of the New Testament. And this God in the New Testament, Jesus is trying to propagate for. He's trying to give this secret knowledge about this second God. And so this is the idea of the gnosis and the Gnosticism, is that this unknown God sends Jesus, and Jesus gives information about him. Well, the role of the Logos in Gnosticism then is that Jesus, the Logos, was sent to give this secret knowledge so that we can get it, we can understand, and we can turn to the good side, get to know that unknowable divine being. And this is only possible for those people that understand the secret knowledge, those people that get it through different Gnostic rituals. The Gnostics are the ones that know the secret stuff. Everyone else is lost and in the dark. And the church sort of disregards, says, hey, you got issues here with quite a few things. Gnosticism rejects Jesus' human and divine nature. It rejects his divine nature because the Logos is created by God, not God himself. And it rejects Jesus' human nature because if Jesus was really human, then he would be material and evil, and he wouldn't be coming from the unknowable, good, divine, spiritual being. A lot of important and crazy stuff, huh? Well, for them then, Jesus' body, they don't want to say it's material. So what do they say? They say it's apparition. It just appears, right? But it's not really physical. Because if it was, it would be evil, and that would be the bad God. Right? Major errors of Gnosticism, there's a lot. Right? Gnostics, of course, deny the goodness of the created world. They say it's evil. Well, from Scripture and from Christianity, right, and the deposit of faith handed on by Christ, is that creation is good. It's not a bad, it's a good thing. Today's world, we see sort of a Gnostic idea that material stuff is bad. But from the beginning, creation is good, right? The whole idea that there's one true God, right, who is the God of the Old and the New Testament, right, and the reality of Christ, human and divine, along with, then, the fact that the important aspect of Jesus Christ being human and divine is his passion, death, resurrection, and ascension, the central elements of salvation. All that stuff, they sort of teach something different. Most Gnostics, right, their understanding is definitely messed up. Right? They can't really understand it because they sort of take out certain issues from the faith so that they can stick with their ideas rather than take the fullness of truth given by Christ through the Scriptures and through tradition. Today we see a lot of connections with Gnosticism and New Age movements. Right? This idea of if you read your horoscope or you get your signs or you do your fortune telling or your tarot cards, right, or you look at the crystal ball, you can get some kind of secret knowledge about what life's all about to help you out. Right? Gnosticism and New Age, both of them connect sort of your secret knowledge with your own personal salvation, rather than the idea that Christ is what redeems and he gives all truth. Next, Arianism, coming about around the 300s. Gnosticism started at the very beginning. Even John was countering the Docetists, which is kind of a Gnostic idea. Arius himself, he was a Catholic priest from Alexandria, but he studied Neoplatonism, this idea, and studied Gnosticism, and it took him to the idea that Jesus Christ couldn't be God, or he couldn't be equal to the Father. Right? That God is God, and so Jesus is a lesser God, or a created supreme being, something less supreme than the big one. Right? Maybe he's better than creation, but lower than God, right? A demigod. Arius sees Jesus Christ then as sort of this middle ground, right? Something created, but not eternally begotten. Not the second person of the Trinity. Not divine. This heresy was huge. It was so big that it split up the East and the West for quite a while. You had many tribes of Visigoths. They were all over Europe around the 300s, 4th century. It sort of adopted this idea that Jesus was like Superman. And so you've got a big-time split that even had various fights and wars and violence break out. Arians versus Orthodox Christian, and it was a huge issue for quite some time. It was finally defended, and defended a lot by the Catholic Church, defended by St. Athanasius, who we get that famous quote, "Man fully alive," from, defended by reaffirming the truth from Christ and the Scriptures, reaffirming what Christ has taught about his divinity, being consubstantial, one with the Father. Christ says many things. The Father and I are one. Right? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Right? I forgive sins. Only God can forgive sins. Therefore, he is God. Right? All of these different things from Scripture, reaffirming that Jesus Christ is and must be divine, right? Or else there is no Christianity at all. Arianism was finally overcome through clear, consistent, slow teachings, catechesis, that is, teaching of the faith, missionary works, and through sacrifices in many ways, even to the point of death, of very many men and women. Took a lot of time, but that's where we have our creed coming forth of God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten but not made. Arianism has been revived today. We see it in some ways. We see it with the quest for the historical Jesus, where some people say that Jesus was a wise man, a great teacher, he did a lot of stuff, but not divine. Maybe you see even History Channel stuff about the miracles of Jesus, and they try to play it off to where it's just natural occurrences, right? Show that Jesus isn't divine. He's simply a man that does cool things. Some groups today, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, both see Christ as Son of God, but not equal to, consubstantial with the Father. So there is a disconnect with Catholic Church teaching regarding divinity of Christ. All right. You can stop and rewind if you need help with those again to look at them. Moving on to the next three heresies, we need to have a short little lesson on what they're about. And they have to do with personhood and nature. Personhood and nature. A person is one who is a being with reason, free will, capable of love. These are non-material spiritual attributes. Keep that in mind, right? Reason, free will, love, those are spiritual attributes, right? We call a person with the power of intellect, free will, a soul, right? Spiritual souls are immortal. God, spiritual being with intellect and will, divine person, right? Angels, human beings, created persons, right? Still the same. Angels, pure souls, right? Human beings, composite. Immortal, immaterial soul, and material, perishable body. Okay. Continue on. Jesus himself, then, one divine person with two natures. Uncreated nature, right? Divine, eternal nature, and his created human nature. God becomes man, right? The union of these two natures, complete, full, entire, one not destroying the other, they are totally there without mixture, right? Is one divine person with two natures, and that gets its technical theological term, hypostatic union. Hypostatic comes from the Greek hypostasis, which means person. When they spent tons of time trying to discover what personhood is all about and nature is all about and who Christ is, the Greek term hypostasis is connected to this, which is why we get hypostatic union. Christ has two natures, divine nature, right? He has omniscient, all-knowing intellect, and the divine, all-powerful will. He has the human reason and human will as well, right? And he has his body. He's got his passions and his emotions. That's why we can say Jesus is like us in every way but sin. Right? These next three heresies each get something wrong with the nature or personhood of Jesus. Pause it if you need time to think about it. Apollinarianism comes around in the late 300s, 4th century. This comes from Apollinarius. He was a bishop, starting within the church. Right? He starts thinking about it. He's trying to understand Christ. That's a good thing. But he says that Jesus, true God, human body, he doesn't have human mind and will. Apollinarianism kind of has the idea of a man or God in a human suit, or sort of God in a human costume, human skin. You've seen Men in Black. This is the Men in Black idea of Edgar, that the alien comes down and takes the body of Edgar and walks around in it, right? This is the issue. The error is, if Christ did not have human mind and will, he did not live a completely human life. So he didn't completely share the human experience, and therefore, we as humans are not redeemed. Nestorianism. He was also a big figure, Patriarch of Constantinople, in the 300s to 400s. Nestorius also trying to understand Christ, and he says, okay, we've got the divine and the human, but he doesn't understand the incarnation. So what does he say? He says the divine person and a human person are glued together in the persons of Jesus. In other words, two persons, two beings glued together. Problem with this? What does he look at? Well, when Jesus suffers, he says the human suffers, but the divine person doesn't. When Jesus is on the cross, just the human man's on the cross, the divine person's with him. Well, the issue there then is that we don't have the infinite sacrifice of God because God's just using some human puppet, right? Here the term Theotokos comes in, trying to understand the incarnation. This is the problem with Nestorius. God becoming man in the person of Jesus Christ. And so Nestorius denies the title of Mary, the bearer of God, because he doesn't like the idea that God could be born. Right? He said she's the mother of just a human person, Jesus, but she's not the mother of the person of God. In other words, God doesn't become man. That's the problem with Nestorius. Orthodox Catholic belief is Jesus is one person, two natures. Hypostatic union. Right? Hypostatic union formally comes about from the Council of Chalcedon. Christ, one person, possesses two natures. All right. Extension of this idea that Mary, Mother of God, and why that comes about, doesn't come about Mary. It comes about trying to understand Jesus Christ. Right? She's the mother of the person of Jesus Christ, who is human and divine. Right? If you deny the divinity of the person of Christ, well then you deny the fact that we're even able to be redeemed by Jesus. Who cares if some dude dies on the cross, right? It doesn't have the infinite value, right? It's not redeeming. So this idea, if God truly is born of Mary, well then you can call her the mother of the person, right? This person who is divine. Very important. Take a second to think about it and pause this if you don't have it down. Next, later, all those are dealt with. All great documents, doctrines coming out about that, clarifying it. Monophysitism comes out 400s to the 600s. This is the idea. Mono meaning single, physis meaning nature, one nature. Monophysites teach that you have the divine and human nature, but that human nature can't stand up to the divine nature. So rather than two, right, they claim that the human nature of Christ was sort of swallowed up or crushed, or a drop of water that is absorbed by a larger body of water. This idea, right? This also has issues with if Jesus then isn't fully human, doesn't fully take on the human experience, and humanity isn't redeemed. Which pope argued successfully against it? Pope Leo the Great. Leo the Great has a great tome, which is in our book, I believe, that outlines the Catholic position, the church teaching position. Think about this. This is in 400. So when we say Catholic, there is no other denomination, right? There is only the Orthodox Catholic position, right? So what do we mean by Catholic? The church position, the universal position, right? Important to know that term. Accepted in the Council of Chalcedon 451. This is it. This is our section on the early heresies. Tomorrow we shall get to the next little bit. For us, reading, if you've already read that section on the heresies, move on to the Protestant Reformation and ecumenism. But if you haven't, read the section on early church heresies. Questions that regard early church heresies are questions 8 through 13 in your study questions.